Welcome to this webinar, Women in Leadership, Reflections on the Life of Chiara Lubich and the Thought of Pope Francis. Over 600 of you have registered on Zoom and many others are streaming live on YouTube and Facebook. However it is that you're joining us, we're glad you're here. My name is Greg Metzger. I'm part of the team at New City Press in the United States. We are a proud co-sponsor of this encounter, together with our sister publishing house, New City London, and the United World Project, an initiative of the Focolare movement designed to promote universal fraternity and to network with organizations around the world sharing the same goal. All three sponsors want to emphasize how vital this topic is to our organizations and how grateful we really are for each of the panelists from around the world that are joining us. So let me introduce each of them to you now. Maurizio Gentilini is the author of the recent biography, Chiara Lubich, Prophet of Unity, a comprehensive look at the life of Chiara Lubich. Maurizio works in Italy at the National Research Council in the Department of Human Sciences. Maurizio, welcome. We're so glad to have you here and so glad your book is now available to English readers.
Welcome to you. Good evening. Many thanks for the invitation.
Yes. Sally Axworthy is the British ambassador to the Holy See. Since joining the FCO in 1986, her career has taken her to Russia, Ukraine, Germany, India, and different countries in Africa. Ambassador, we're so honored to have you with us.
Thank you, Greg. Good evening, good morning, wherever you are.
Yes. And Austin Ivory is a British writer, journalist, and fellow in contemporary church history at the University of Oxford. He is known internationally for his two essential volumes on Pope Francis, and more recently for a book he collaborated with Pope Francis on entitled, Let Us Dream. Austin, it's so good to have you here.
Good to be with you, Greg. Thanks for the invitation.
Yes. Francesca Di Giovanni is an Italian lawyer who has worked in the Secretariat of State of the Holy See since 1993. In January 2020, she was appointed by Pope Francis to serve as the Undersecretary for Multilateral Affairs in the Section for Relations with States, becoming the first woman to hold a managerial position in that branch of the Roman Curia. Francesca, thank you for being with us.
Thank you to you. Hello to everybody. Thank you for the invitation.
Yes. Yes, and Elizabeth Whalen is the founder and executive director of Project Leah, a nonprofit social enterprise for women impacted by the justice system in Indianapolis. Elizabeth, we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I'm excited for this panel. Very exciting.
Excellent. So to fit all of these insights into this hour, we're going to ask if you have questions to pose them in the Q&A box, and we will try to respond to them in writing as best we can. There won't be a time for some formal Q&A from folks. But we do, if you have some feedback or questions, you're welcome to put them in Q&A, and we'll try to respond in writing and pass them along for later response as well. Our moderator today will be Matt Driver. Matt is a consultant in Scotland focused on leadership development and is the author of Coaching Positively. So Matt, I'm happy to hand things over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Greg, and hello everybody, and thank you so much for joining us from all around the world. It's great to see you all. I'm going to, first of all, get Maurizio to speak. Maurizio Gentilini, you published your biography of Chiara Lubich, Prophet of Unity, last year. And if I'm right, it's the first biography of Chiara that situates her life in its historical context. And this, for me, makes your book incredibly interesting and very insightful too. For those who don't know her, Chiara Lubich was the founder of the International Focolare Movement and was its leader and president for many years until her death in 2008. Something that struck me, Maurizio, when I read your book was that Chiara was identified as a leader very early in her life. She was actually taken onto a 3-year program by Catholic Action when she was around 18 years old, so very young at the time. And I've noticed in my own association with Focolare for about 40 years that always there's been a woman in a leadership role, that the president, in fact, of the Focolare will always be a woman according to its statutes. So Maurizio, would you please tell us a little of Chiara as a leader? When did her leadership begin and how? Maurizio, please.
Thank you, Matt. As an historian, I can try to answer to the question when the leadership of Chiara Lubich started and how it developed. In particular, her spiritual leadership in the historical context of Roman Catholic Church in the middle and in the second half of the 20th century and until today. Chiara Lubich was a charismatic woman and a spiritual leader and a witness and the protagonist of the 20th century, who is difficult to place within the schemes we usually use to describe and classify public figures. Her charisma was born during the Second World War. Faced with death and destruction in a climate of no hope, Chiara experienced God as love and discovered him as her father. Chiara and her companions chose the way of life of the first Christian communities where no one was in need. They went to live in community on the model of the family of Nazareth. This is the Focolare. Small communities of lay people called to generate the presence of Jesus. Chiara and her first companions carried with them only the gospel, and they meditated in particular on Jesus' testament. May they all be one, the Gospel of John. The key word was unity. Unity with God and unity of the human family became the purpose of their lives and the base of Chiara charisma, a female charisma. But this new way of Christian life had to confront with the church and the Christian culture and tradition radicated at that time with a lot of difficulties. An example, during the Second Vatican Council on October 1963, Cardinal Leo Sunens, a famous theologian and Bishop of Bruxelles, made a famous speech addressed to the Council Fathers. He asked the assembly, he said, "But where is the other half of humanity?" The other half was intended to be the female part in the life of church. A provocative question, which could shake a theological approach to its foundations, an approach lasted almost 2 millennia. But this question, posed by Cardinal Sunens, highlighted a reality that existed and was solidly recognized inside the Church, the portion of God's people who are female. At the Council, the presence of women was numerically just symbolic, only 23, both religious and lay, on a total of over 2,000 participants to the Council. Still at that time, the presence of women in ecclesial life was limited by tradition, by culture, by mentalities, by the transmission of text, by moral norms, by ways of thinking and ways of believing. Even the image of God, always represented as a male figure, which became the single criterion for depicting God. As the spirit of the time, Chiara's project, the Focolare movement, was called Work of Mary, was officially approved at the same time of the speech of Cardinal Sunens in 1963. 1 year later, 1964, after an audience granted to Chiara, Pope Paul VI allowed the president of the Focolare movement to be a lay person. It was a milestone in the history of the Church. And then Pope John Paul II underlined the strongly Marian characteristic of the movement, the Focolare movement. In the late 80s, when the collaboration of Chiara Lubich with Pope Wojtyla was very close, Chiara asked him that the president of the movement should always be a woman. The Pope responded immediately, and why not? If only. The status approved by the Holy See in 1990 contained this norm, which is something new in ecclesial movements and offers a new horizon for the role of women in the Church. In 1988, Pope John Paul II dedicated the apostolic letter Mulieris Dignitatem to women, a document to which Chiara had also contributed as consultant. The greatest novelty marking the story of Chiara Lubich is precisely her being a woman. Chiara, who spoke with popes, with the head of states all over the world, she always recognized the importance of the role of women, even for the Church. She does so without claiming any rights, without any harshness, rather by demonstrating that she merits the authority with which she's recognized, as it was for the great saints in the history of the Church, for example, Caterina da Siena, or Chiara of Assisi, or Teresa d'Avila. But now, just a last reference to the title of this webinar, Women in Leadership. I can also observe how so many of Chiara's intuitions, some of them born during the bombing of the Second World War, this intuition have only now come to maturity at the level of the magisterium of the Church, in particular the magisterium of Pope Francis. I'm thinking, for example, of the great stimulus of Pope Francis in Evangelii Gaudium, to return to being an outward-looking church on the road, on the way, in the direction indicated by the Council. We are reminded of the maxim of Pope Francis, the reality is more important than ideas, which is nothing other than the Jesus criterion, to start from reality, that is, from the suffering of humanity. This doesn't mean we have to deny principles, but to put them into practice, to give them a value of real fecundity for the life and hope of people. Then let us consider the criterion inspired by love and mercy, which must always guide the application of a law, the criterion contained in Amoris Laetitia, with his invitation to rediscover the charisma of spiritual discernment. Then let us consider the key words of Pope Francis: dialogue and fraternity, fratelli tutti. For Chiara Lubich, the dialogue with humanity started from walking side by side with people, with communities, and with faiths as an expression of universal fraternity, and on the basis of the golden rule which is present in all religions and which is the foundation of relationship between the faithful of every creed. Unity, the principle of unity, is the principle of all intuition and realization of Chiara Lubich, because it is capable of transforming the life of people of all ages, of all ethnicities, of all cultures and religions. Then let us consider courageous experiments in the social sphere.
Maurizio, can I just pause a moment? I just need to ask you to, if you could conclude in the next minute, please. That would be very helpful. I'm sorry. Thank you. Just so in summary, what's key message for you from Chiara's life?
The key message,
wonderful points you've made,
is that the spirituality of unity is deeply anchored to the relationship of love present between the three people of the Trinity, the most important dogma of Christian religion. The spirituality of Trinities has found correspondence and syntonies in the most unexpected places all over the world. Everywhere, meeting man's need for absolute, seeking dialogue and communion.
Maurizio, thank you so much for painting this great picture of Chiara's life and the impact that she's had right across the world and across the whole of the church as well. So thank you so much. And again, thank you for your book.
Thanks to you.
Thank you. Leadership is increasingly being exercised by women in all kinds of ways, in government, as heads of state, heads of governments, in the climate debate, for example. And 5 years ago, the British government appointed a woman, Sally Axworthy, who we welcome today, as ambassador to the Holy See. So, Sally, what do you think women bring to the role of ambassador, and perhaps more widely too?
Thank you, Matt, for the question, and thank you for inviting me to speak. I feel the question is a little bit of a minefield, inviting the unwise generalizations, but nevertheless, I'm going to try and answer it. So, as you said, I've been here for 5 years, and my time at the Holy See has coincided with a growth in the number of women ambassadors. So we have 18 of the 88 resident embassies at the Holy See are now headed up by women. And actually, we're increasingly visible, I think, because we have a women's group, a women ambassadors group, and we've done things like we sponsored the Pope's video on women in leadership in the church. And that's something that is becoming more common in the British diplomatic service too. We have, I say we have 32% of British ambassadors are women, which is more than it was, but maybe still not enough. But they do include women ambassadors to all our very big posts. So Washington, Moscow, Berlin, Beijing, Rome, the UN and NATO, they're all headed up by women. And why do we think this is important? I'm going to give you some reasons. The first reason is representation. So diplomats should represent the countries they come from. And that's why my ministry, the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, has targets for diversity. So we aim to have 50% of our diplomats being women, 7% being people of colour, 7% people with disabilities, and 6% LGBT. So we want to be the kind of, we want to represent the country that we are. Secondly, diversity in all walks of life, we believe, brings better policy. It checks groupthink and it brings in different points of view. So in the UK, there's something called the 30% Club. Actually, I think it might be worldwide, which campaigns for at least 30% women on all company boards. And they make the case that companies with women on their boards perform better. So it's not just that it's a nice to have, it's that it actually affects how those companies operate. In public life, there's evidence that countries where women hold more political power are less likely to go to war, less likely to commit human rights abuses, more likely to spend on health, and more likely to fight corruption effectively. So those are real world results of having more women in power. The third reason is that women bring an understanding of the issues that affect women. And now I could give you lots of examples here, but I'll just give you a couple. One is the UK has been running something called the Preventing Sexual Violence in Conflict Initiative. And that was started by someone called Aminka Helic, who saw the effect rape had on women in conflict situations. She's from Bosnia in the 1990s, and she went on to found that campaign. And our previous Prime Minister, Theresa May, really championed action to end modern slavery, of which the victims are 70% women and girls. So now to go on to the controversial bit. Why is female leadership different? I'm going to give you some quotes here so that I don't get myself into too much trouble. But Helena Morrissey, who's actually the founder of the 30% Club, and she's also a non-executive director of my ministry, in her book, A Good Time to Be a Girl, she quotes research that says that on average, the female brain is hardwired for empathy, whereas the male brain is hardwired for understanding and building systems. She also quotes research from the Heterodox Academy, who found, and I'm paraphrasing broadly here, that the actual differences between men and women are a result of not just of biology, but also the societies in which they grow up, so nature and nurture. So I would argue that empathy is a useful tool in diplomacy. Ambassadors are bridges between cultures, and they must be deeply rooted in the culture from which they come and deeply curious about the culture to which they're sent. They must be able to listen, understand, and explain, and they must build dialogue. Empathy and understanding are needed, which Helena identified as male and female traits. So we need the things that women are good at in diplomacy. The UN's long recognized the positive impact women have on peace processes in its Women, Peace and Security initiative. It's not just that women and girls are disproportionately affected by conflict, but they also have a positive effect on peace processes. Where they participate meaningfully, the resulting agreement is 35% more likely to last. And as an example of that, you can think of the effect the Marches for Peace and the Women's Coalition had in catalysing the peace process in Northern Ireland. Despite all of this, women remain underrepresented in leadership, as we know. I won't quote you any statistics there because I think you know. So how can we change that? The 30% Club says that you need at least 30% women on the boards of organisations for them to be not just a representative minority, but to really affect change in the way that organisation runs. I also very much like what Mary Beard says. Mary Beard is Professor of Classics at Cambridge University. In her book on women and power, she argues you can't fit women easily into a structure that's already coded as male. You have to change the structure. She advocates decoupling power from prestige, thinking collaboratively, and thinking about power as an attribute, not a possession, the ability to be effective and to make a difference in the world. So that brings us to women leaders in the Catholic Church. And for me, Chiara Lubich is a striking example of confident female leadership in a world in which the prevailing conditions did not encourage women to lead. And there's many other striking examples in the Church's history. My two favourites are Hildegard of Bingen and Mary Ward. They seemed motivated by the mission they had to accomplish and not for a personal desire for glory or prominence. So it seems paradoxical to me that in a church whose leadership is male-dominated, the kind of leadership that Pope Francis seems to be advocating is really exemplified by the great women of the church, such as Chiara Lubich, and also, I should say, by the religious sisters and the Focolarini. They, to use Mary Beard's words, use their power to make a difference in the world. They decouple power from prestige, and they think collaboratively. So all of this diversity is really about bringing people in, not excluding people. It's about bringing women into leadership, not excluding men. And I'd just like to finish with a quote from, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Arjun Thong, the great teacher of the Thai Buddhists, who, when he was introducing Chiara Lubich, he said of her, I quote, "The wise person is neither male nor female. When someone turns on a light in the darkness, one does not ask if the one who lit it was a man or a woman. Chiara is here to give us the light she's experienced." Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sally. Thank you very much, and so much for us to think about in everything that you've said there as well. So very grateful to you. So we know that, as you've said, that Pope Francis is an active advocate for the leadership of women. He's increasingly introduced women into the Catholic Church structures. And Austin Ivory, in the book that you wrote with Pope Francis, Let Us Dream, he speaks passionately and frequently about women's leadership within the church. Austin, can you give us a flavour of why the Pope thinks it's important and what he expects women to bring to leadership roles?
Thanks very much, Matt, and hi everybody. And I want to begin, if I can, answering that question by referring first to Maurizio's excellent book, which I really recommend. He has a paragraph which really struck me, actually. It's on page 287, where he says that Chiara's example and experience have helped encourage the church to move from the idealization of female role models to concrete reality. That is, to women as flesh and bones, lay and religious women, mothers, wives, female workers, all part of God's people. It's a very good paragraph, which also ends with, envisaging a world in which there isn't a need for the church to have encyclicals specifically on women, but rather he envisages a synod of all God's people, attended by representatives of both halves of the human race, as it were. And that really struck me because I think it coincides very beautifully with what I think Francis is seeking to do. You have not got from Pope Francis a lot of lofty theological speculation. In fact, he said early on in his pontificate that we need a theology of women. He's obviously not satisfied with the kinds of complementarity theology which have existed in the church for some time. He clearly, and what his contribution, I think, has been to actually to bring women into the structures of the church of authority and to talk about the need to do that. When I wrote my second book on Pope Francis, which is called Wounded Shepherd, it came out in 2019, I have a few pages there where I talk to various women in Rome who all talk about a new atmosphere, and that I don't think anybody disputes that under Francis, doors have opened for women in a whole new way. There's a new atmosphere. Women are listened to, their ideas are followed through. And we have many, many departments, if not most departments in the Vatican now have women as undersecretaries or consultors and people who come in from abroad also and sit on them, councils and so on. And this has accelerated, I think, particularly in the last 2 years since the beginning of 2020. And we have with us today, for example, FRANCESCA Di Giovanni, who occupies one of the most important roles in the Secretariat of State, which is liaison with multinational bodies. But we have recently had Natalie Beckwart, Sister Natalie, appointed as Undersecretary to the Synod of Bishops, a key appointment because she will have a vote in the future Synod as a woman. We've had Nuria Kalduk as Secretary of the Pontifical Commission, Biblical Commission, and so on. But really quite spectacular was last summer when I was putting together with Pope Francis this book called Let Us Dream. And he appointed all of a sudden 6 consultors to the 6 women to the Council for the Economy, which is the body overseeing Vatican finances, so that almost every lay role on that body went to a professional lay woman. Very striking, some extremely interesting and important figures on that body. And of course, because we were in the middle of the book, I was able to say to him, why? What was your thinking there? And he gave me some very, very interesting answers. And actually, I think what I was eliciting from him were, there were questions really that I've had for him in these many years of my talking about the pontificate, when I'm constantly asked about his view and understanding of women. And I'll try and give you a little summary of where I think Francis is going and what he's trying to do. I think in my world, the English-speaking Anglo-Saxon world, which is dominated understandably by a kind of liberal feminism which understands equality and power, that all these appointments are seen as just little piecemeal actions which prevent the big thing, which is the ordination of women. Until women are ordained, the church can't be taken seriously on gender. So they always portray Francis as a cautious reformer, opening doors, but then never going where he needs to go. I think that's a wrong reading of Francis. Yes, he does start from the assumption that the door to women priests is closed. He said that, and I don't think any pope would say differently, because there is no tradition of female ordination and because of what St. John Paul II said. But I think what he's starting from is to say, actually, the mistake is to confuse ordination with power. In other words, the real issue here is a long-standing problem we have in the church of clericalism, which is the confusion of the sacrament, the power of sacraments and the power of governance. And this is something that people have said over and over again. So the real issue is clericalism, and clericalism is the confusion of power and privilege. It's the conception of power rather than service. And the real task for the church to become synodal, to become missionary, to become evangelizing, for the whole people of God to assume the responsibility it was given at the Vatican Council, Second Vatican Council, means participating and leading in the decisions which the church takes. So the task is leadership, conceived generally, not simply in terms of clergy. And so, I mean, when Francis says in Evangelii Gaudium, when we speak of sacramental power, we are in the realm of function, not dignity or holiness. Okay. So how do you challenge clericalism? And I think if you look at Francis's pontificate, this is a big question for him. The big part of his reform, how do you convert a culture dominated by clericalism to a culture of service? And here's where I think he sees women as playing an absolutely vital role. You bring women into positions of authority in the Vatican, not as priests, not as monsignors, but as who they are, religious sisters or lay women or focoladini or whoever they are. And that you allow, as it were, women to be included in those decisions that are taken and convert, as it were, the culture of the institution. And I think he makes this clear in Let Us Dream on page 66. He says, this is what has concerned me in Rome. How better to integrate the presence and sensibility of women into the Vatican's decision-making processes? The challenge for me, he says, has been to create spaces where women can lead, but in ways that allow them to shape the culture, ensuring they are valued, respected, and recognized. The women I have appointed are there because of their skills and experience, but also, he says, to influence the vision and mindset of the church's bureaucracy. And he then talks about a number of examples. To understand Franciscan reform is to understand the dynamism of the periphery and the center. Change happens when the center opens to the periphery. That's the gospel dynamic. So his task as Pope, as a reforming Pope, is to open the center, the Vatican, to the periphery, in this case women, bring them into contact, bring them into tension, bring about that change and reform, which in turn will help to create that synodal missionary church, which is key to evangelization. So I think for Francis to consider the question of ministry, as so many people sadly do, only through the lens of the clergy, is to get stuck with old wineskins and to miss the new wine that the Spirit is offering. And I think a key document in this pontificate to understand that is Querida Amazonia, his response to the Synod on Amazonia of October 2019, which, as you remember, got very polarized and stuck in a classic discussion, a classic polarization over ordination. In this case, it was about ordination of married men, admission of women to the diaconate. Francis cut through all that in Chiedi d'Amasonia. He said, what is the Spirit doing? The Spirit is already pouring out the gifts that the church needs. Our problem is that we don't recognize them. And he says in Chiedi d'Amasonia, he talks about how women basically run the church in the Amazon. As so often, women run the church even in our own countries, but we're often not willing to recognize that. You know, they run schools, they run charities, they run hospitals. They're already leaders. They run, of course, also religious orders and abbeys and all the rest of it. Why don't we think of them as leaders? So he says, Francis says in Chiedi d'Amasonia, that these roles that women already play needs to be publicly recognized and commissioned by bishops, allowing them to have a real and effective impact on the organization, the decisions and the direction of communities. So I think for Francis, the Spirit is already pouring out his gifts on the people of God to enable the church to do what the church needs to do as its mission. The obstacle to that is our own mindset, which is too often bound up with clericalism, whether we are lay people or clergy. We have to counter that culture of clericalism, realize what the gifts are, what the Spirit is doing. And one key way of doing that is to ensure that women are present right at the heart of the decisions taken in the church. Thank you.
Austin, thank you so much. Thank you very much. Again, so much for us to consider, to contemplate. Thank you. Thank you again. Now, you've done part of my next introduction already, Austin, so thank you. One of the women that Pope Francis has appointed to a senior role is Francesca Di Giovanni. And we're very happy to have you with us today, Francesca. Thank you for coming. At the time, you were labelled as the most senior woman in the Vatican, I think, when you were appointed. Francesca, just to remind us, is Undersecretary in the Holy See's Secretariat of State, and she has responsibility for contacts with international organisations. In this job, Francesca, you represent the Vatican in dealings with organisations like the United Nations and UNESCO. And at the same time, as someone who's been part of Focolare for some time, you're also very much influenced, I think, by Chiara Lubich and her own ideas about leadership. So what has Chiara's thinking brought for you, in particular, in the job that you're doing now? Francesca.
Thank you, Matt. Yes, of course, not only Chiara's leadership, ideas on leadership, but the spiritual message of Chiara. I met the Focolare movement when I was 14, and I felt that for the first time that it was possible to live the gospel, even as a girl at that moment. And it was then that I made a lasting discovery of the love of a father who wants us to be brothers and sisters, no matter of age, color, religion, or position in the society. Jesus' testament, the Tolby one, not only became my own ideal in those years, but I shared one with people I met from various parts of the world. And in living together, it also became something that enlightened the whole of life. I joined the Vatican in 1993, and I worked on a wide variety of issues. This desire of unity among peoples always inspired my thoughts and drove me while I was working on those topics, as well as dealing with the work of international governmental organizations. The ideal of unity was a key for my work, and as every aspect could be understood and enriched when the dialogue is truthful, even among different perspectives. As Pope Francis reminds us, trust born of the interconnectedness between people is the cornerstone of all relationships. Those relationships can only be built up through the development of a culture of encounter, we know, in which every voice can be heard and all can thrive, finding points of contacts, building bridges, and envisioning long-term inclusive process. When Pope Francis at the beginning of 2020 said he hoped there will be more women in leadership role in the Roman Curia, honestly, this was not a job I had thought for myself. The Secretariat of State is an office at the service of the direct service of the Holy Father and of the Holy See, well known for dealing with delicate and complex issues. It's an office where a woman has never held the leadership position of Undersecretary. Of course, it's a demanding job. My area of focus, has been said, is the diplomatic relations of the Holy See in the multilateral sector. It deals with the Holy See's relations with international intergovernmental organizations and with the system of treaties that the states adopt on issues that require an international commitment. It spans from human rights to development to the status of women and so on. I think that the spirit of cooperation and dialogue brought by the ideal proposed by Chiara is particularly necessary now in the sphere of international relations. In a world that has been forced to confront a series of grave and interrelated sanitary, socio-economic, ecological, and political crises. This crisis, aggravated by the pandemic, take place in a world where, I quote from Pope Francis, the sense of belonging to a single human family is fading. But today, as I said, we can't see this culture of encounter, this culture of closeness that Pope Francis is hoping for humanity. We see very few traces of this. The world is far from realizing the ideal of unity among peoples and between peoples. We have endless conflicts, terrible sufferings inflicted on innocent people with inexplicable brutality, cultural heritage of all humanity and humanitarian structures made deliberate targets, terrorism, slavery, peoples forced into hunger and diseases that would be treatable, unborn children killed in the womb of their mothers for economic calculations, the elderly and the sick pushed to die because they are judged to be a burden on society, abuse covered up for too long, and sufferings that cannot be healed. The pandemic that increases pre-existing differences and creates others, together with an ecological debt demanding an urgent response. These are parts of the cry of humanity today, a cry that we must hear, which Chiara Lubich has always pushed us to hear the echo of Jesus Christ, a cry on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? What he has gathered in himself, that of all humanity. And in his re-abandoning himself to the Father, Chiara saw the key of even of our unity, of the unity that could be bring back, could be back with the Father and among us also. Unity in which we find this key brought by Jesus forsaken, that we can see in every suffering, in every horror and evil, hatred and oppression, disparities, divisions and indifference, even today, between peoples in the same church, among the churches, among religions, as Maurizio Gentilini rightly explains of Chiara's belief. The world can reflect itself in the face of Jesus forsaken and find today new hope for him.
Thank you, Francesca. I'm sorry we're a bit short of time at the moment. Would you like to just conclude what you would like to say to us?
Okay. So I am certainly inspired by this ideal of Chiara, but as our is called work of Mary, as has been said, Chiara thought that the focolare movement, besides its trying to be this factor of unity, both in the Catholic Church and in the various areas of society, could contribute, among others, to give the woman a better place in the church. Chiara wrote, "The woman has not yet found her place there, except in the form of too much service and not always in the evangelical sense. It will be Mary who will shed light on the mission of women in Christianity. And we must contribute to it, since this is perhaps a sign of the times." So Chiara asked for this even at that moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francesca. Thank you. I wish we had more time.
May I add just a little note? I met the Pope 2 weeks ago, and he said to me, "We need women's touch." He said 2 times or 2 or 3, we need women's touch. So.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. It's a lovely thought to finish with. Thank you. So, under the leadership of Chiara Lubich, a number of prophetic institutions were born. You may have heard of the Movement for Unity in Politics, for example. And another of these was the Economy of Communion, a new way of living economics, which has also contributed to the recent Economy of Francesco. Many entrepreneurs are now women. And one example is Elizabeth Wallin, who joins us from the States today. Elizabeth's begun a social enterprise called Project Leah, which aims to help women who are emerging from prison to re-enter the world of work. Elizabeth, it's great to have you here. You've committed yourself to this style of economics, which owes itself to the prophetic leadership, I think, of Chiara. Can you say something about how you experienced Chiara's leadership as a young person and how your work in Project Leah reflects those ideas? Thank you.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you everyone for having me today. I think in reflecting back on the influence of Chiara growing up, it was very unique in its own way, because I grew up in New York City, in a very diverse city. But also I grew up in a household where my father went to his Episcopalian church and my mother to her Roman Catholic church. And so I always grew up experiencing this idea of spirituality in a very inner experience, an intimate relationship. And then I also, I went to the United Nations school for a period of time where I was surrounded by individuals of different cultures, and we practiced and learned about different principles and religions. Principles of, for example, Kwanzaa, where you can see this correlation also in Chiara's work, these same values of giving for the other, or dying for the other, or making the other's problems your own, underlying these same values. So growing up, I always, in a way, struggled with this identity to this institution, and more with Chiara's message of this radical solidarity and mutual love, and experiencing that in unity and community with one another. And so as through my work with Project Leah and this community solidarity and working with women who are often cast to the side in our society, very much here so in the United States, and the rising number of that, the economy of communion is very much represented in this cooperative economics that also I think was interesting to read in Maurizio's book during that period of time when Trent was a huge influence, and this city and this town built up on cooperative economics and political life and the function of that in the towns. So I think, and I think you can see that very much growing up in our society now, of this community solidarity. How do we live in communion with one another, and in doing so in business? How does business also provide a role as a way to become an actor in that? Another way for us to live these ideals, not only at home, but in the workplace and in our social lives, which was also a way of that Chiara painted Jesus. Jesus wasn't Jesus only at home. He was Jesus in community. He was Jesus at work. So never taking off this mask and that authenticity of love.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Elizabeth, and we wish you very well in your work, in your project. I just had a slight glitch on my screen there. Had you finished, Elizabeth? Sorry, let me just check.
Yes, I had finished.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
But
I had a slight glitch on my screen. Thank you. Thank you so much to you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to all our speakers. It's been really wonderful hearing from you all. And thank you for sharing so much of your own lives, your own work, your insights, your learning with us all. It's been incredibly profound. It's been very, very broad. So thank you so much from all of us here. Now, we began by hearing from Maurizio Gentilini and his book, Chiara Lubich, Prophet of Unity. I just wondered, Maurizio, just to finish off with you for just 1 minute, tell us one thing. Why should we buy your book? Actually, I already bought it.
I don't know why. A book is a book.
Okay, yeah.
I try to read it, and then I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you very much. Well, we thank you for that. By the way, I have it already here, so that's 2 of us have it anyway. Thank you so much to you, and thank to all our speakers again. And I'm going to hand back to Greg just to round things off for today. Greg, over to you. I'm just...
Thank you. We really appreciate everybody coming and joining us. We did just want to say a few things as we finish up. We've emphasized Maurizio's book as well as Austin's book. And really, I think for me, as we were listening, there really is a real synergy, I think, between what Austin's doing and the work that he's done with Pope Francis in this book, along with the Prophet of Unity. So we just want to mention them both as we finish. There are two versions in English of Maurizio's book. The one on the right is from New City, London. And you can find that at their website, is listed underneath at www.newcity.co.uk. And the one in North America, the United States, is newcitypress.com. And these are each versions in English, but appropriate to the particular cultures and language of both countries. So you can find those for yourself at those websites. They're also available at a number of other major retail places, but these for sure are where you can find them at our two different websites. We also wanted to mention Austin's book one more time with Pope Francis, Let Us Dream, which he's really highlighted in such a useful and helpful way, these insights. We're going to be sending an email to those of you that are watching on Zoom. You will receive an email from us as a follow-up with links to these books, also to the document that Austin referred to from Pope Francis that was very important to what he was talking about. And we will also be, whatever other resources that our panelists have to share, we will be sharing those directly with you within the next 24 hours. You'll be getting that follow-up. But for now, I think that we're going to leave it here. We thank you. If you have any questions and any type of feedback that you'd like to pass on to us or to pass on to the panelists, this is the email that you can use, info@newcitypress.com. We also will follow up with other opportunities for things that we'll be doing along these lines in terms of webinars and resources as we go forward. But for now, just one more time of thanks to each of the panelists for the time that they gave, both in preparation and today. And so thank you, and we'll leave it for now. Take care.